I
No.
will.
Record. No. Oh, share screen. There we go.
So, yeah, I will turn the stage over to Kian, who is going to argue why we should open the borders, let anyone take a job anywhere. But as a parenthetical uh, clarification, that doesn't mean we're going to grant anyone citizenship to this country. It's not like if you walk across our border, you become a U.S. citizen. We're not saying that. We're not debating that. But we are saying you can cross the border and get it and look for a job here in the United States. And we want to talk about the economics of that. So, okay, take it away, Kian. The floor is yours.
Um, so first I just wanted to say that the way I took this was that we're letting people in to work. So I do kind of talk about work visas in this because I didn't know if it was strictly just letting anyone in or just letting people in to work. Um, I don't know if that's okay, if that was what that's what I got from it. So first I want to talk about field labor and wage shortages. So businesses often need temporary workers that U.S. natives don't often fill because they are looking for um, long-term jobs to help their families in the United States. So, so these are great for immigrants that come in, specifically how I was talking about, like a visa. If they do come in to work, they're coming in to work for a temporary amount of time to make money for their families or to have a job here to stay in the U.S. And talking about that is that small businesses need workers at lower wage rates. And I know it seems unfair, but immigrants usually work at a lower wage rate than U.S. citizens do. And without small businesses, our economy would really have a downfall because small businesses are a large part of our economy. And if you think about it, these jobs are not very difficult to do when it comes to small businesses. So the same talent that a citizen would need without going to school, immigrant would also have, and that's why I say here that talent fits the budget. I have a little graph here that shows immigrants without four-year college degrees and the industries they work in. And you can see here that it's farming, fishing is 30%, 36%. Buildings and ground cleanings is 36%. Textiles is 29%. And I'm not going to get too in depth to all of these and what they do, but if you can notice how large of a portion of the workforce in each industry is immigrants. And I don't know who said it in the comments before we started, but without them having these jobs, each industry might not have enough people to keep jobs open for Americans. Because if a certain company can't fill a certain amount of spots with only citizens, American workers, then they might as well close down. And these immigrants coming in and taking over those extra spots gives more Americans jobs. There's also a wider array of talent when you're looking at more people coming into the country. The way I would look at it is imagine taking 100 people and imagine taking 1,000 people. And let's just say you're trying to find the best singer. Where would you rather look? Would you rather look in a group of 100 or a group of 1,000? You'd want to look in the larger group because there's a better chance of finding what you need in that larger group. So having these more knowledgeable people coming from around the world to increase our technology advantages, you really just got to think about how other countries do things and how they benefit and how they can come here and help us benefit like they do. There'll always be a larger pool of workers to choose from, which is always great because you're always trying to find that person that will do what you need. And if you only have a small group, they might not fit that standard. This is another thing I was talking about. if if they came here to work. I don't know if in this example that they would have to be working to stay in the United States, but if they do have to be working in the United States to get across the border, assuming that we're letting them all in to work, they must be working to remain in the US, which results in a long-term loyalty to these companies. And these immigrants usually come here to make money to send back home or to be in the US as long as possible. And regardless of the reasoning behind their loyalty to these companies and working, um, they will always show up and work at peak performance to stay in the US and make enough money in the US to live here. Here's another graph. It's just showing the employed natives versus immigrants. I just really wanted to put this because I often hear the argument that immigrants are taking all of the jobs in the US. And as you can see, 17,000 compared to 1,001 or 118,000. They do take up a good percentage of jobs, but those are also jobs that usually Americans don't want to be working. And I also hear a complaint about how immigrants, uh, they just keep increasing in the workforce. And yeah, they do, but it's a steadily increase, and it's short, as you can see, from 2000 to 2019. So another argument I usually hear against letting them in is that they take a lot of our welfare. They need food stamps. They can't afford being here. Their jobs don't pay enough to have them living suitably. But the fact of the matter is, immigrants pay over 90 billion in taxes and only receive 5 billion in welfare funds annually. I also want to reiterate that the only positive correlation between immigration, there's only a positive growth or correlation between immigration and economic growth in the US. And blocking immigrants from coming to the US gives other countries a competitive advantage. For example, let's say that um, we stop letting immigrants in, and let's say Nike has a factory in the US, and we stop letting immigrants in, and Nike doesn't have enough people in the US to work that factory, or maybe they don't have the money to be giving full wages to people who work in that factory. Even though it's unfair, they might move to, let's say, Canada to get more immigrants working for them, so they can have the same products being released at the same amount of time, so their consumption stays high. And that's really all I had for my opening statement.
Okay. Thanks. Let's guess, does anybody have any sort of questions they need to ask before we go on? Real quick ones. I'm going to make Michelle the co-host now. And if no one has any questions, then we need to stop participants sharing. I'll do that. So Michelle has a chance to share the screen. Okay, so we heard. I think there may have been some clarification needed in terms of whether all these people needed visas or they were allowed to come in and then look for a job. So usually, I think open borders means you don't have to have a visa before you enter. That's what it usually means. But so we'll see what Michelle is arguing against. If you're arguing for something that's different than she's arguing against, then there could just be some space in between the two arguments. But we'll see what she has, and then we'll talk about it later. So Michelle, if you're ready to go, we can hand the floor over to you.
I have like a thing on the side that I'm using more than the PowerPoint. I just made the PowerPoint so people have something to look at.
Yeah, that's actually a very good presentation strategy to have two things. One that you're presenting for the people, and some notes for yourself too. So that's good.
Okay. Why do people from other countries want to work in the US? The US offers better paying jobs than some of the lower countries, like third world countries. The US has more opportunities where you can make connections with a lot of people and get better jobs from like the experience you get in like the lowest job possible. And then it's kind of a chance of freedom, especially if you're from like a Middle Eastern country where like women, for example, don't have as much freedom as men do. So my points for against would be that it would hurt US workers. It's only beneficial for the wealthiest percent of Americans. The minimum wage could decrease and there would be a lot of political backlash. So it's only beneficial for the top percent because if more people from poorer countries want to come to work in the US, the supply of labor would go up, which is good for the US, but it can hurt Americans because companies will want to hire people who will work for less because they care more about their company doing better rather than their employers making good pay. So that helps the top percent, if especially if they're like company runners. And it can hurt workers by legal American citizens are the people that are going to be voting, and usually the top percent are donating their pay and their money to like political figures that they want to have run campaigns and stuff and be in the government. And if they're only wanting lower class immigrants to come work for them because they'll have to pay them a lot less, then they're going to get people, public figures and political figures that will attend to these needs instead of public figures that are good for like the working class Americans. And this can lower minimum wage because the cost of living in a lot of foreign countries where immigrants are from is a lot lower than in the US. And this causes the minimum wage to be low because US workers want a specific salary. And if companies are hiring people who will work for a lower income than that, then the minimum wage won't change. And it's already been stagnant for a long period of time and hasn't really changed, kind of depends by state. And cost of living in the US is so high that in some bigger cities like New York and LA, people can barely go paycheck to paycheck because of how much they have to spend to live in the city that they're living in. And especially if the foreign worker doesn't have to be mobile and live in the US and it's just like kind of outsourcing, then they won't need as much money to get paid in order to live in their own country. And if foreign workers come over and work, oh yeah, that's what I said. And technology has taken a lot of jobs already from US workers. So having people who work for lower pay is kind of also taking jobs away. And if the minimum wage were higher, then this problem would be less because there would be like a line that American workers would get paid in order to reach their income and what they need to live in the US. But because that isn't really a thing right now, then it's kind of harder. And this picture shows that like what lawful immigrants versus unauthorized immigrants take jobs in the US. And this is from 2014, so it's not really updated. So, and then this is a scale of like the minimum wage, how it's been in the US over the past few years. And the blue line is just like in adjusted 2019 dollars. So if we were talking about like inflation in 2019, this is how much people would be making throughout the years. So it was a lot higher in like the mid 60s, and now it's kind of remained like up and down around 725 in 2019, 2020 dollars. And then this shows the GDP, or not the GDP, the cost of living in all these countries. And then this like pie chart is kind of where the most immigrants come from. So the lower the cost of living, the more they're going to try to immigrate to the US in order to get their better paying jobs so that they could stay living in their countries. And then these are my end thoughts. I just thought they were good points from the debate that I kind of watched to get my points. So Kathleen Newland says, the increase our intake of skilled people, but not to the exclusion of poor. Many of the family members who come into our dominant family stream are not wealthy people. Their children do well. They become bedrock to the society. And I couldn't agree more with Vivek's statement that the argument has been a tremendous benefit to America. So if you take skilled workers that are going to be doing like better paying jobs and they're going to have their children be taught and educated to become skilled and get better jobs in the future, would be good for like the Americans. And immigration is good for the countries that people are leaving. They transmit knowledge and can even create companies and or jobs in their home countries. But costs associated with immigration, which are building adequate infrastructure, supplying adequate public services, takes planning and funding from the government. So like unskilled workers would need a place to live, which would come from like taxes and the government. But immigration is good because if they do come work here, they can, like, as I said in the beginning, make connections and stuff, and they can even create their own companies that would be big in their own countries, which increases their costs of living. So that's all I got.
Okay, thank you. That that was good. We have both parties have given their statements. Does anybody have any clarifying questions, or uh, don't make your own points yet? But if you just wanted to hear something, anybody have anything they wanted to add? I I think I can wait. Also for myself, Keen, did you have anything else you wanted to say in terms of a rebuttal or a closing type statement? You're muted.
I can do a closing statement and just reiterate my main points.
Sure.
So really my main points in my argument is that having people come and having an open border really gives U.S. citizens more jobs at the end of the day. GDP will rise. There will be more sorry, I don't know why I can't speak right now. There will be more consumption in the U.S. There will be more money made, given, and everything will be. Our economy will grow, regardless of how many immigrants come. There will always be jobs open, and having immigrants come in will open more jobs at the end of the day. So I think I stand by that. I think that immigration is a good thing for our economy and will only make it better.
Okay, thanks. How about you, Michelle? Do you have any rebuttals or closing statements?
Well, I'm against in the debate, but I'm kind of undecided, like as a person, because
Hmm.
I do agree with Kian's points. And then at the same time, with the minimum wage stuff, like if it ends up decreasing the minimum wage, then that's kind of bad for the American citizens. But like if they make the minimum wage higher and there is some kind of line that American citizens have to make in order before foreign people can come in and adjust that and like take jobs that no one else wants to take, then that would be good for the economy. But if it's just taking like more skilled jobs, then it's kind of not good for Americans. But if they're taking jobs from Americans that Americans don't want to do, then it's good for the economy.
Okay. Um, Maybe before I say anything, I want to open the floor to our audience, which is kind of small today, but there's 7 of you. If any of you has a comment, like something you wrote in your homework that hasn't been brought up today, I'm interested to hear. You can, or a question to ask either of our panelists. Does anybody have anything? Oh, there's something in the chat. Okay, Kevin brought up minimum wage. Let's talk about minimum wage because I think the way Michelle you were talking about it, you made it sound to me like it's something that would just happen on its own, or something that, like, if enough immigrants lived in this country, there would be this lowering of the wage, which I agree with. That I tried to give that to you at the end of the last lecture. There wasn't much time, but that was the point of the end of Wednesday's lecture, was that there would, the wages for some industries would definitely go down, but the minimum wage going down, that can only happen as a law. That's not an economic decision. That's a legal decision. So to decrease the minimum wage would have to be an act of Congress. And I'm not sure why we would do both of these things. Say, we're going to open up our borders and we're going to decrease our minimum wage. I don't think we would have to do that. I think actually it wouldn't make sense to do that. We'd say, well, we'll open borders, but let's keep the minimum wages where they are. We actually don't want firms to give people really, really small wages. That's that would maybe have an effect of depressing wages for everybody, even like the domestic workers who are unskilled and are getting paid close to minimum wage. If there's a huge influx of immigration and the minimum wage is decreased, probably those domestic workers' wages are going to be decreased also. And if we currently believe that 725 is actually, 725 is not very high, but I do think, I guess, well, here's my point. I don't believe that just because we have a lot of immigrants that the minimum wage, the legal minimum wage, would decrease. Maybe what you're saying is it wouldn't change. Is that what you're saying? That it would just stay 725?
Like as like inflation increases, then it just kind of stays 725,
Okay.
and there isn't room for it to
That's
like
what you're saying.
progress.
You're saying we would not have the incentive to increase it.
Yeah,
Okay,
not that it would like decrease, not that it would go to like $5 or something.
I get it. So you're saying in real terms it will decrease because
Yeah.
of inflation, but nominally it'll stay the same. I think that's actually a reasonable prediction, because just think, if everybody's working at 725 and they're quote unquote happy with it, they're willing to work at 725, then you may say, why should we raise the minimum wage to, let's say, $15? That would be drastic. That's what we're going to talk about next week. Raise the minimum wage to $15. There could be a lot of firms who say, well, I'm not willing to hire that many people at $15 an hour. And you sort of defeat the purpose of the minimum wage if you're actually causing people to be unemployed. So I will agree with that. I think that's a fair point. Let's go to Kian. You're talking about how firms need lower wage workers. What did you mean by that? Why do a lot of businesses have to have workers at a low wage?
So when I was reading up on it, it's mostly so I said they don't need it, I guess.
They want it. That's right. They want it.
They want
If I ask the question, why do firms want to pay people a low wage? That's an easy question to answer.
Yeah.
It means more profit for them.
Yeah.
But you said, I think the way you sort of framed it was that there are a lot of businesses, maybe small businesses, that need to pay workers a lower wage. And I think this is something that maybe some people should push back on. Why is that? I don't know if it's that they need to or they want to. You could argue that they can only afford to hire so many people at the market wage, but if they can pay something below the market wage, which is what you can do for immigrants often, then they might hire more people. You can make that argument that actually, the hours worked will go up if you can pay a lower wage. But I still don't believe that there's a lot of jobs or industries where the only way they can succeed is if they pay their workers very low wages. In my observations, it's actually, that's just the firms wanting more profit. Why do firms pay people so little? It helps their bottom line. And every time that they sort of complain about something like, we can't do this, like the 40-hour work week, Instead, it used to be a lot. People worked a lot longer, or child labor laws. Every time there were some laws that were trying to improve working conditions for people, the business community said we can't do that. If we do that, we'll go out of business. And in my mind, it's like, no, you sort of lost your credibility here. Of course, you don't want to do these things, but yeah, I'm just pushing back a little bit on this idea that firms need to pay people low wages. I actually think it's more of that they want to, but they don't need to, right?
Yeah, well, especially with the bigger firms like Nike and Apple and stuff, they definitely, it's more of a want than a need.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was reading up on it, the reason I put this in is because I was reading that there's a lot of small businesses that really can't afford to have enough workers to stay afloat. So they hire immigrants to have, instead of one worker paying them a good amount, they have two to keep them running because they really don't have enough people or money to keep their business afloat.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what was I going to say? You're talking about immigrants that are already here. I sort of think, well, what we're debating, what I wanted this debate was be there would be no longer such a thing as an illegal immigrant, like an undocumented immigrant. If you're here in this country, you can work. And what would happen if all of a sudden there was no such thing as an undocumented immigrant in terms of getting a job? What do you think would happen to the wages of the people who are here legally versus illegally? I think they would start to equate. Like right now, you can sort of pay illegal immigrants less money because they don't have the rights and the protections of legal immigrants. And is that really what we want? I feel like if your business is only thriving because you're giving undocumented immigrants a lower than market wage because they have no rights or protections, um, that just seems inefficient in some ways because it's almost like uh, I don't know how to say it exploitation, or um, your business is thriving only because there happen to be this pool of people who have no other options. Um, I think actually we could transform our economy into one where uh, there are enough good jobs that we can afford to pay everyone a market wage rather than have this sort of segregated class between illegal and legal immigrants. But that's, once again, firms would not like that. Businesses would say, no, we need to pay those people less. Um, I just think there's definitely some room to push back against that. Kian, you also said immigration causes economic growth. And I don't know if you meant this, but you said something like they would create more jobs than if the number of jobs that are lost to the immigrants is smaller than the number of new jobs that would be created for domestic workers. Did you mean to say that?
Um, yeah. So when I was reading up on it, it said that many like companies have a certain amount of immigrant workers that they wouldn't be able to put out the same output without them. So they would decline and start having less workers in general because their company wouldn't be able to have the same amount of output. So it was saying that with immigrant workers will make more jobs for.
That's hard to believe, isn't it? Like in the aggregate, that people come here to work and they are taking a job that maybe an American doesn't really want to do, but it actually increases the number of jobs for domestic American workers. That does seem very surprising to me. Maybe it's just an argument I haven't heard very much. You said that it would cause economic growth, and you gave some arguments for that. I think it's a consumption argument, isn't it? Why would a big influx of immigrants cause us to have some economic growth? People who come here, they'll pay taxes here, and they'll buy things here too. They're not going to just they might send some money back home. That's definitely true, but um, they will pay for things just by the fact that you have to live here. You'll have to be buying things here. So I do think that's a good argument in terms of GDP rising. Um, I already talked about why the minimum person. Okay, Michelle, you said if we're going to allow a lot of immigration, then it takes some planning. That was maybe one of the last things you said. And then you said like taxpayers would have to pay for things like housing. And I'm wondering, why is that? Why would it be up to the taxpayers? Why couldn't the immigrants themselves pay for the expenses that they're incurring here in this country?
I was thinking along the lines that if they're moving to the US and then they're working for like a lower cost, and if they move somewhere like outside of LA, like in the Silicon Valley or like in New York or something where there's a lot of like factory jobs or just like lower paying jobs, they wouldn't be able to pay for the housing in that area. So like it was one of the points made in the debate that I watched that it was kind of like they can't pay for themselves to live in those cities. So it's kind of like the government has to be able to pay for them to do that and make like their own like smaller neighborhoods for like foreign workers.
That seems like an odd argument to me because it seems like you're debating against a different motion. Because this motion is just let them take a job anywhere, not we're going to force these people to come here and work our jobs. We have a meat processing plant and nobody wants to work here. We're going to take some people from Mexico, ship them here, and you have to work here at this plant. Nobody's proposing that. This is only granting more freedom to people if they want to. If they choose to, they can come here. They don't have to apply for a visa. I sort of think open borders means you don't need a visa. You can just come right in. But let's say there are issues with housing. Like there's a great meat processing facility in Arizona, and there's some people who live in Mexico who would like to work there, but they just can't afford the housing. Well, that means they wouldn't come, right? No one's forcing them to come. I would think that the argument is let them come if they choose to. And there are some expenses that if they can't afford to live in the US, then they just won't come. Rather than saying it's up to the taxpayers to subsidize them. I'm wondering if this argument is really about the type of expenses that we would have to pay, and that's like medical, hospital visits. We have a rule of ethics in this country that says if somebody shows up at the hospital, you have to treat them. You can't just say, well, if you can't pay, too bad. So hospital costs are a real cost that could get moved to the taxpayer or at least other insurance payers. And there are some other ones you might say that I can understand, but I just wanted to clarify that this motion isn't about forcing people to come somewhere and then it's up to the government to make them find a place for them to live. I don't think that's what I meant to argue about. Okay. Um, I don't know. I had other things. Not so important. Um, yeah. So nobody else has any comments, any arguments that they had to make? Remember the economics of this. The thing that I'm going to talk about on the quiz is what happens to the aggregate labor market with these immigration. What happens? What curve is shifting? In which direction? If we have an open border, if let's say tomorrow we decide the U.S. completely has an open border, what happens to the labor market in terms of economic curves shifting? Do you know the answer to this? Give me the most important one, at least. Nobody knows. This is trouble. I'm gonna ask you this on a quiz. You want me to make it multiple choice? Labor supply left, labor supply right, labor demand left, labor demand right. Those are the four choices. Which one is it? If the U.S. opens its borders, you can vote if you don't know. Just guess. I'm going to type the answer here. I've had 0 guesses. I can understand if nobody knows the answer, but nobody's even willing to guess an answer. Good guess, Michelle. I'm asking for the major one. So pick one, either demand or supply. And then tell me if it shifts right or left. Okay. Keen guessed, thank you. It's not demand, it's supply. And does the supply curve shift left or right? Remember, the x-axis is quantity. So shifting right means increasing quantity, and shifting left, given the same wage, increasing quantity. It's not left. Sorry, Ryan. It's like the last thing everyone said. Labor supply shifts to the right. Okay, open borders equals labor supply shifts to the right. Okay, you guys who are here and paying attention will get this, at least on the quiz. You'll be able to get that answer on this quiz. I think that's as economists, that's just the big takeaway here is, do we want this? Do we want to open our borders and have a major significant shift to the right of the labor supply curve in all industries, especially that are unskilled? In more skilled industries, you could argue that a lot of those people are already here, right? If you have a PhD, for example, and you apply for a visa in this country, you're almost certainly going to get it, because we want people with a lot of human capital, a lot of training and abilities to come to this country, and there are already plenty of opportunities. If somebody has a PhD and they apply for a job in this country and they get it, there's no question they'll be able to come in here. So I don't think the issue is about skilled labor. It's actually more unskilled labor, something that you show up at the job and they show you what to do, and then you do it. There would be a big shift to the right of the labor supply curve, and that increases. It has two effects. If you can imagine the supply demand curve, when the supply curve shifts to the right, wages go down and quantity of labor goes up, and that's a real thing. There actually could be a depression of the wage rate of unskilled labor in this country. I think that's the biggest economic reason not to have open borders, is that there are some people domestically who would suffer. And that is, unskilled workers in this country would probably see lower wages because of it. But there are benefits. Having more people work, having more labor means businesses can produce more. The people who live there are going to demand some goods and services too. That's like a secondary effect. And there are some benefits to be accrued from this. So in my mind, the economic debate here is between the costs and the benefits of doing this. There are some costs, there are some benefits, and which one's greater? It's really a matter of opinion, or at least analysis, interpretation. Who's getting the benefits? I like that. Michelle talked about that. She said a lot of the benefits of this would go to the business owners. They're sort of richer people who already have a lot of money would probably get more from this. And I agree with that. So it is worth thinking about who's benefiting and who's. I should say this: don't all consumers benefit if the price of their goods is cheaper? And this is true in agriculture. It's absolutely true in agriculture. The fact that seasonal workers can come and harvest, pick strawberries, that lowers the price of strawberries. That means we all benefit from getting cheaper strawberries. And that's one of the hidden benefits of these sorts of policies that we should also take into consideration. So let's have our final tally. Who I'll just assume that you are not switching or you're not paying attention. But if you are paying attention and you do think you've changed your mind and from for to against or from against to for, please let me know in the chat, and I will just take a little bit of notice of it. But anyways, I think we're done. Does anybody else have any comments? Does everyone understand what I'm saying about labor supply shifting to the right? Shifting to the right means at the same wage, you have an increased quantity. That's why it shifts to the right. Okay, gotcha. I'm going to stop recording.